It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson is here. Patch Tuesday is here. He'll cover that as always. Talk about a number of exploits and a number of routers, again, vulnerable. And then finally, why you maybe shouldn't trust BitLocker when it comes to hard drive encryption. SSDs that decrypt themselves. It's all coming up next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 689, recorded Tuesday, November 13th, 2018. Self-Decrypting drives. Security Now is brought to you by WordPress. Reach more customers when you build your business website on WordPress.com. Plans start at just $4 a month, and you can get 15% off any new plan at WordPress.com/SecurityNow. And by Thinkst Canary. Detect attackers or malicious insiders on your network with honeypots that can be deployed easily in minutes. For 10% off and a 60-day money-back guarantee, go to canary.tools/twit and enter the code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us section. And by LastPass. Secure every password-protected entry point to your business. Join over 43,000 businesses and start managing and securing your company's passwords today. Learn more at lastpass.com/twit. It's time for Security Now, the show where we cover your security and privacy online with the guru, the king of security, Mr. Steve Gibson. Hello, Steve.
Yo, Leo. Great to be with you on this November 13th, the lucky second Tuesday of the month. As I teased at the end of last week, some news had just hit as we were going to podcast about two researchers at a university in the Netherlands who decided to take a look into the details of self-encrypting SSDs. And, rather than just assuming because they encrypt, that's all we need to worry about. It's like, oh, well, they encrypt. Oh, perfect. They decided to take a peek under the covers. And what they found is not one of the 7 that they examined from Crucial and from Samsung. 3 were from Crucial. The other 4 were from Samsung, including the very popular 840 EVO and 850 EVO SSDs. None of them were doing the job right. And in fact, it was possible without any information to basically decrypt the drive. Consequently, the title for this week's podcast is Self-Decrypting Drives.
Oh, boy. Well, the worst part of this is that in some cases, Windows relies on these drives' encryption.
Yes, we will have some takeaways for our listeners. There is the recommendation. Well, these guys have I was glad that there wasn't an overabundance of other news because I wanted to give this topic enough attention. Good. What's interesting is that very much as with the vending machine problem, anyone who's been listening with, focus to this podcast for a few years would be able to state, as we will, how simple this problem is to correctly solve. Yet somehow none of these drives solved it correctly. They solved it incorrectly. So anyway, there's lots of good takeaways from this, including what anyone using BitLocker on one of these should probably do. But these guys go even further. So we'll get to that. We're going to talk about last month's Patch Tuesday this month. That is, today is the second Tuesday of the month. So it's our Patch Tuesday for November. We're also going to look at a GDPR-inspired lawsuit filed by Privacy International, just quickly, just to sort of put it on our radar in case it actually happens to develop into something. There is another new botnet in town making the rounds, and 2 ports that our listeners should just double check on, so that we'll talk about. We've got another irresponsibly disclosed 0-day, this time in VirtualBox, but probably not a huge problem, but worth, again, taking a look at. CloudFlare has just released a very cool new app for iOS and Android that allows those mobile platforms to use their now kind of increasingly popular 1.1.1.1 or 1.1.1.1 DNS. We've also strangely enough, in perfect synchrony with this week's main topic, Microsoft is cautioning about the in-RAM vulnerabilities of BitLocker in the presence of, not surprisingly, Leo, you and I were talking about this a long time ago, the FireWire 1394 or the Thunderbolt interfaces. And so that's pertinent because we'll see what our guys have to say about whether hardware encryption is actually safer than software. We're going to close the loop with our listeners, cover a bit of miscellany, and then, as I said, take a deep dive into the question of the actual delivered security of drives that advertise that they perform hardware-level encryption. And we'll note that 100% of the drives that were examined were found to be deficient. And that's to say nothing about hard drives. We don't know what they're doing. You don't know until you look. And there has not been enough looking yet. So I think an interesting and useful podcast for our listeners this week.
Can't wait, as always.
And a fun picture.
Yeah, I love the picture of the week. Before we get to that, though, I do want to mention our sponsors. Steve uses them. I use them. Actually, you can say that about a lot of our sponsors. In this case, we're talking about WordPress.com. I've been a WordPress subscriber. I got my a little badge on my WordPress.com app the other day for 12 years. That's a long time. I fell in love with WordPress when I first started using it way back when in the early 2000s to blog. At the time, I was running my own site. You know, I was self-hosting, which, you know, it means you got to have a computer somewhere on a server. I was using SoftLayer. That costs money, and then you have to install WordPress on it. That wasn't too bad. And then you have to, you know, keep it patched, keep it up to date, mess with it, template with it. I think as a result, I really understand how WordPress works. But it ended up being, I was spending most of my time like under the hood instead of driving the car. And then I found out about WordPress.com. Awesome. They do the hosting. They do the security. They do the software updates. You focus on your content on your site. Moved over immediately. It's hassle-free. And by the way, it cost me less than doing it myself. Not just in time, but literally in money. WordPress.com is a great way to create your site. I should probably spend a little second or two just saying why you need a site. When I talk to high schoolers, and I occasionally do this for high schools, I tell the teenagers, your reputation online is really your responsibility. If you don't put something online under your name, and I'm not talking about your Twitter handle or your Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat account, I'm talking about a website. When people Google your name, they're not going to find you. They're going to find the stuff other people put up about you. You don't want that. You want to control it. So you need to, I think, as a teenager, create your own website and put your best stuff up there. Videos of you winning the 400-meter race, or your best A+ essay, or pictures. And that's what I do. I put a lot of pictures up on my website. I'm pretty proud of my photography, and it's fun to share it with people that way. And by doing it on your own site, you control it. You own it. Not Mark Zuckerberg, not Jack Dorsey, not Evan Spiegel, not some other company. You own it. Your site. You upload your images, your video, your audio, your more. You can import it from anywhere. You can export it back out anytime you want. No one can no one can take it away from you. Now, of course, you can still link to your Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and all of that. You can still do all that. Well, I guess you can't link to Snapchat, but everywhere else you can link to. In fact, WordPress makes it really easy. I have photos from Flickr automatically posted in my WordPress account. When I had an Instagram account, it would automatically go there. It is so you can kind of cross-post, and that's great too, because it helps build your presence on the internet, build your reputation across the internet. And if you're a business, all of this times 2. Businesses absolutely need to control their presence on the web, and your own website at WordPress.com is the best way to do this. Now, you may say, well, you know, I know why you haven't done it. I don't want to become a web expert. I'm not a geek. But you don't need to be. WordPress handles everything. You choose from hundreds of designs. Pick one that matches your aesthetic. Customize it if you want. Don't if you don't want. The beauty of WordPress.com is it's not a bunch of cookie-cutter sites that look all alike. Every WordPress site is unique, reflects your interests, your style, your business, your brand. And it's yours. I cannot emphasize that more. Built-in search engine optimization means when people Google your business name or your personal name, they'll find you and your site, the thing that you control. They have, of course, social linking, which means your visitors, your customers, if they like you, they can link to your site on their Facebook and Twitter, helping to broaden your reach. You never have to worry about questions or puzzles or issues because their support team is the best in the business, and they're there 24/7. And did I mention it's really affordable? $4, as little as $4 a month for a great site. You owe it to yourself and you owe it to your business to go to WordPress.com. Actually, go to WordPress.com/security now. That way you get 15% off any new plan purchase. So you're going to save right up front. WordPress.com/security now. Find out why almost a third of the web runs on WordPress. I know when I say that, it doesn't sound like believable, but it's true. 32% of all the websites in the world, the whole world, 32% are running WordPress. That ought to give you some idea. I mean, this really is the best way to go. WordPress.com/security now. Save 15% off your new WordPress site. WordPress.com/security now. Back to Steve.
Okay, so anyway, our picture of the week is fun. I found this, someone sent it to me through Twitter, and I just thought I got a kick out of it. It shows 2 little cars with cameras mounted on their roofs, implying that they are self-driving cars. And so, of course, we all know that the famous question that the officer asks you when he pulls you over is, do you know why I pulled you over? And so anyway, the point is that we have a police officer standing who's in the second car, which is labeled a police car, standing at the window of the first driver asking, does your car have any idea why my car pulled it over? Which, yes, the world we live in today.
That's probably true. Did you see that, and I don't know, this is more of a rumor than actually an announcement from Google, but their Waymo division is about to launch under a new name, which they're not telling anybody, basically Uber with self-driving cars. You'll be able to get in a self-driving cab soon.
Wait, who? Google?
Well, Google has a self-driving division called Waymo.
Okay.
It's Alphabet. But
right.
Yeah, so they may be the first to the table with a they're already testing it in Arizona.
So no human in the car. Wow.
I mean, I bet initially they'll have what they call safety drivers. Although there was a Waymo accident the other day that was caused by the safety driver because he didn't trust what the car was doing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's almost always the humans that screw things up for computers.
You know, it's weird when I've mentioned that I had a little bit of a high school reunion a couple weeks ago up in Healdsburg, and while we were having dinner, we hadn't seen each other for 45 years.
Wow.
And they knew I was a techie and so forth. And so one of them said, Steve, like, of everything that's happened recently in technology, what would you say you least anticipated? And I didn't say what I wish I had said. I said, no way could I have foreseen this crazy expansion in mass storage density. I mean, that's what's enabling.
That's absolutely true. Yes,
it's like it's just unbelievable that we can have, half a terabyte on a keychain.
I have recordings of me saying by the year 2005, we'll all be using solid-state holographic memory. These ideas of these spinning drives make no sense whatsoever. So that's one thing. They've really managed to increase the capacity of spinning drives beyond any reasonable expectation. And then look at solid-state and the speed. Yeah. In a way, that's the solid-state I guess I was thinking of. Not exactly.
Yeah, though, in retrospect, what I wish I had followed that up with was the other thing that just I accept today's storage. I still can't wrap my head around the idea that cars are driving themselves.
Yeah.
That just seems like what?
It is remarkable.
What?
Well, and it was only 10 years ago. Remember, we even talked about on the show the ARPA Grand Challenge, where these so-called autonomous vehicles would basically go 10 feet and drive off the road.
Well, and yes, and one of them would win if it could make it to the finish line.
To the end.
It wasn't a matter of like getting there first. No. It was like it didn't wander off into Colorado somewhere and, disappear. No, I'm just amazed.
Which I'm going to put a little sidebar on this. Shows you how important government investment is in these technologies. The ARPA Grand Challenge, ARPA, comes from the Department of Defense. We wouldn't have self-driving cars at this level, I believe, if it weren't for ARPA. Yeah,
Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Wouldn't have the internet without them either.
No, in fact, there are major technologies which sane, bottom line oriented entrepreneurs will not invest in because they're just too far out there. Well, that was before the days of Elon Musk, so maybe that's but I think no longer the case.
Yeah, but I do think, if the government didn't do it, it wouldn't have. No, you're right. It's not financially feasible.
It's just too big.
Yeah.
Yeah. Global network? What?
What? No.
I remember the first time I heard that. It was like, I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, that's going to take a lot of wires. Right. It's like, how is that going to work? Right. Anyway, of course, we know how it works. We also know that Microsoft has today announced the release of last month's update.
It's out.
Yes.
1809.
Yes. It's supposed to be out. They've said it's out, but they are releasing it slowly.
Yeah.
I took off. Yes. Once burned. Yeah. I took off my hold-offs and did a manual update, and I got the November security roll-up and so forth, but no sign yet of the feature update for Windows 10, which takes us from 1803 to 1809. And that's not surprising because they stated that they're planning to roll out the 1809 feature update slowly. Yeah. So it may not appear immediately for anybody, even if you haven't tweaked your Windows 10 to say, I'm going to wait to see how other people do with this before.
I already had 1809 and everything, so I can't tell you, who's getting it. But that's interesting.
Yeah. So for what it's worth, a system which was fully qualified, which was the one I'm talking to us over, my Skype machine, is I updated it to Pro, so I could have control over hold off, and I set them to 0. I updated. I got the November stuff, but no feature updates yet. Yeah. So it'll be, as they said, I guess they're just going to really watch this one closely as it rolls out. But they're convinced they understand everything that was happening before relative to data loss. Now, there were 2 other problems that just arose that didn't make it into today's conversation because they're sort of off topic. But apparently, Windows is losing its file associations so that it doesn't know what app is associated with what file.
Yeah, that's always been remember, that was a problem all the time in the old days. All the time.
And so that came back.
Yeah.
I guess the adhesive on the patch got kind of old and it just fell off. So that's now back. And, who knows? So have fun, you Windows 10 people.
So mean.
So Privacy International, is one of those companies like the EFF that is maybe a little reactionary, but we're kind of glad they're there because there needs to be somebody to push back on the behalf of the consumer when profit-seeking companies don't have anybody to give them any oversight. So they have just filed complaints against 7 companies for what they consider to be wide-scale and systematic, and that is to say deliberate infringements of data protection law. Their announcement last Thursday, November 8th, started by saying, today, Privacy International has filed complaints against 7 data brokers. Now, what's interesting is that these are not companies any of us are aware of. We know about Equifax and Experian. Those are 2 of the 7. But the other ones are like, huh? There's one you can't even pronounce. ACXIOM. All the good names
Axiom,
were taken.
Though, right?
Oh, yeah. All the good names were taken.
Yeah.
So it's like ACXIOM and Oracle, but I don't think that's Oracle. Well, I think that's just some other. I think it's a name collision. It can't be our Oracle, because I don't think Oracle's a data broker, are they? I think they're.
Well, they might be. They have their fingers in a lot of pies. That's interesting.
Well, maybe it is Oracle, and then 3 ad tech companies: Criteo, Criteo, Quantcast, and Tapad, Tapad. And then, of course, Equifax and Experian. They say so these complaints were filed with, wait for it, data protection authorities in France, Ireland, and the UK, meaning GDPR.
Yep.
Privacy International urges the data protection authorities to investigate these companies and to protect individuals from the mass exploitation of their data. They said, my feeling is, okay, so we knew the GDPR was going to ruffle a lot of feathers, and it does require, it's hard to browse the web now without having to acknowledge, yes, I know you're storing a cookie. Yes, I know you're storing a cookie.
Yeah, that drives me crazy. There's no reason for that. Come on.
Yeah, it's like,
absurd.
Okay. It's basically they've put a click-through on everywhere you go
site.
now.
Which, by the way, anesthetizes people to any real issues with tracking cookies.
Yep.
Okay. You just click it because you want to get to the site. It's so annoying.
Fine, get out of my way. Yeah, exactly. Or you it's down at the bottom and you think, okay, what's wrong with the screen? Something's broken, and then it's like, oh, there's a cover over banner at the bottom. So click it to make it go away. So anyway, they said our complaints target companies that despite exploiting this is their language, despite exploiting the data of millions of people are not household names and therefore rarely have their practices challenged. In tandem with the complaints, we have today launched a campaign to seek to empower people to make it easier to demand that these companies delete our data, which, of course, remember, is one of the GDPR requirements. They said, our complaints argue that the way these companies exploit people's data, in particular for profiling, is in contravention of the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which took effect on May 25th, 2018. Our complaints are based on over 50 data subject access requests to these companies, as well as information that these companies provide in their marketing materials. That's where, these companies get in trouble because they brag about all the stuff that they've got. And then a company like, a group like Privacy International comes along and says, what? So, and in their privacy policies, they say, as such, our assertions are based on evidence that represents only the tip of the iceberg. We expect and anticipate the regulators will be able to delve more deeply into our concerns regarding wide-scale and systematic infringements of the GDPR. PI, that is Privacy International, is encouraged that the UK's Information Commissioner's Office has issued assessment notices to Axiom, spelled in a way you could never anticipate.
All the consonants.
Equifax and Experian. We are asking the ICO to take into account our submissions in the context of their ongoing investigation and urge the ICO to widen its investigation to include Criteo, Quantcast, and Tapad. As part of our campaign, PI has made it easier for people to write to companies and demand they delete their data. Okay, so I guess this is probably the way this was going to play out, is that the regulation occurs, then it probably takes someone to point the enforcers at suspects and cause cases to be filed, or I'm sure that there's like some sort of a questionnaire that'll be sent that'll go to the attorneys of the companies that'll respond in some fashion. And the point is, I think it probably is the case that these companies have in the past been playing fast and loose with personal data. They're opaque, they're unknown, they probably are not actually in compliance today with the GDPR, so it'll take some enforcement in order to make them, to bring them into compliance. And, as you have noted here and on other podcasts, Leo, I've heard you talking about it, overall, this is probably a good thing for the end user in the long run. So,
yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Was just to sort of to put that on our radar, that there is, Privacy International says, oh, now we have the GDPR. Let's go, poke a few companies that have been annoying us for a long time and stir the pot a bit. It happens. So we'll see. I have a chart in the show notes showing the BCMP UPnP. BCMP is Broadcom, and UPnP, of course, is Universal Plug and Play. I had to be careful not to say pray. The UPnP Hunter botnet. And this is a time sequence diagram, which is a nice way to organize protocol of what happens when diagrams. And so we can see on the left, there's something known as the infector. The first thing it does is send a TCP SYN packet, as in synchronize, which is the way a TCP connection is opened, to port 5431 of a candidate victim. If the victim responds with a SYN-ACK, which is an acknowledgement of the receipt of the TCP synchronized packet, then the infector says, found somebody who's listening to connections on port 5431. So it then sends an SSDP discover packet, which is the universal plug and play services discovery query, over the UDP protocol to port 1900, which, if the victim has their UPnP enabled to the WAN, will respond with an infectable URL, basically saying, here's how to take over. Here's how to take me over. Anyway, this is all by way of suggesting to our listeners that this would be a good time, because this botnet is now loose, to do two things. To make sure that your port 5431 is not responding to TCP SYN packets. And it turns out there just happens to be a handy-dandy port probe available.
Wonder where that would be. Where can I find such a thing, Mr. Gibson?
if you put into your browser grc.com/x, which is I just chose because it's short, /port probe equals 5431 and hit enter, GRC will send some TCP SYN packets to your public IP at port 5431 and will notify you a few seconds later whether anybody answered a knock at that door. You want to either be, preferably you want to be stealth, or you want to be closed. You do not want to be open for business, because that means that your router is almost certainly already taken over. So the first thing you could do would be, and I have a link in the show notes for anybody who wants it, or you could go to grc.com or just put Shields Up into Google, and it's the first link that comes up. After you click through the first page, there's a text field in the middle. You can just put 5431 and hit enter, and it'll also launch a port probe. So you want to make sure that's closed on your WAN interface, and that's not something that anything else otherwise checks for you. So it's worth doing. Then the second stage is something, Leo, that this podcast caused the creation of, and I think I was able to implement it so quickly that while it was still news, while we were doing the podcast, I said, oh, and I've just added that test to GRC. That's that instant UPnP exposure test, which is still, I haven't touched it since I've created it years ago, a big orange square that shows up on the page, and you just click it, and it does that second phase of what the botnet does. It sends a UDP packet to the user's public port 1900 and looks for any response and analyze it if it's found. That's interesting because, as far as I know, this has to be done manually. It would be possible to automate the use of this test, but as far as I know, that hasn't been done based on the rate at which we're seeing these occur. Yet, 54,346 positive exposed universal plug-and-play ports have been found so far since that test went live. 54,000. And nobody should have their universal plug-and-play exposed publicly. So anyway, just a sort of an update. And just so that people understand this, that there is a widely used Broadcom chip which exposes a 5-year-old flaw that is for 5 years it's been known in this lack of universal plug-and-play authentication. And just because I wanted to make sure people understood this, I dropped the list of affected routers onto the show notes, and it's 3 pages. So this is not, grandma's dusty router. This is like the who's who of routers, including ADB, ASB, Billion, Broadcom, Clear Access, Comtrend, D-Link, several versions of D-Link, Digicom, Intex, Linksys, Netcom, Opticom, QR. I mean, I'm just scrolling through 3 pages. TP-Link, Trend Data, Zyxel. It's a who's who of routers. So it's easy to do. Just make sure you don't have this exposed, because this thing is very aggressive. I've seen numbers as high as 4 million, although we believe that those are IPs which are coming and going. It's at least 100,000 at any given time routers that are exposed. they're being used as email spamming proxies. So, because we know that that's what Universal Plug and Play is able to do, we're now seeing that bad guys are bouncing traffic off of other people's routers in order to launch denial of service attacks from that user's router that appear to be coming from there. And also the analysis of this, it took a while to set up a honeypot because they had to duplicate the behavior in order to get the botnet to believe that the honeypot was actually a defective router. But they found that they were sending email through this proxy that was being set up, essentially using this for spam. So you don't want your IP to get blacklisted as a spammer, or you could have a hard time sending email yourself. So anyway, worth making sure that you haven't been zapped by this. And we have another irresponsibly disclosed 0-day, this time in VirtualBox. A security researcher by the name of Sergey Zelniuk discovered and posted a beautiful disclosure. I mean, I look at this is on GitHub, and it's you scroll through this, and it's clear how much effort went into this, and it's a lovely disclosure of what is a difficult. Yeah, now Leo, you got it on the screen, so just scroll down, and you'll see pages of beautiful code snippets that have been pulled out.
This is his resume. He's trying to get a job.
Well, yeah, you wonder about these. Although we'll talk about what he has said in terms of his motivation. But so it's a difficult to exploit, not terribly worrisome flaw in the NAT handling code of VirtualBox's Intel E1000 NIC driver. So, and of course, the Intel E1000 is like the very popular gig Ethernet NIC now. So because he didn't inform Oracle, the guys who are behind VirtualBox, he explains why he chose not to. And I had to abbreviate one word because I wasn't comfortable saying it on the podcast. You'll know when I get there. He said, "I like VirtualBox, and it has nothing to do with why I publish a 0-day vulnerability. The reason is my disagreement with contemporary state of InfoSec, especially of security research and bug bounty." And then he says colon, and then he has sort of three major topics and one with some bullet points. He says, first of all, wait half a year until a vulnerability is patched is considered fine. He says for the second point, in the bug bounty field, these are considered fine. And we have then 4 subpoints. Wait more than a month until a submitted vulnerability is verified and a decision to buy or not to buy is made. Change the decision on the fly. He says, today you figured out the bug bounty program will buy bugs in a software. Week later, you come with bugs and exploits and receive not interested. Third, have not a precise list of software a bug bounty is interested to buy bugs in. Handy for bug bounties, awkward for researchers. And fourth point, have not precise lower and upper bounds of vulnerability prices. There are many things influencing a price, but researchers need to know what is worth to work on and what is not. And finally, his third main point, he says, delusion of grandeur and marketing BS, that's where I chose to use an abbreviation, naming vulnerabilities and creating websites for them, making 1,000 conferences in a year, exaggerating importance of own job as a security researcher, considering yourself a world savior. And then he says, come down, Your Highness.
Wow.
He says, yeah.
Jeez.
Sour grapes much? He says, I'm exhausted of the first two. Therefore, my move is full disclosure. InfoSec, please move forward. So, as with the two cases we've seen of Sandbox Escaper previously and her releasing those 2 0 days, and given the quantity and quality of the work that both she and Sergey have done, and Sergey's is every bit as impressive, it's understandable, I guess, that they might feel jerked around by the bug bounty system and decide that obtaining their 15 minutes of fame and notoriety is worth more than fighting for some cash. But reading between the lines, it's clear that probably that if they discussed with Oracle, if this guy had discussed with Oracle what he found, they might have, and he would have said it, I guess, maybe in general terms, because he wouldn't want to give it away, or they might just jump the gun. They might have said, no, we're not interested. It's not that big a deal. So anyway, we're beginning to sort of see this alternative with 3 of these irresponsible disclosures of 0 days in a relatively short period of time. So it's certainly true that if the developer wants attention, they're going to get more attention like this than if they responsibly disclosed, wait for the problem to be solved, and then obtain a footnote of acknowledgement in the eventual security update. But anyway, to the specifics here, all versions of VirtualBox from 5.2.20 and prior are vulnerable. This is true for any host because the bug is in a shared code base, and it's true for any hosting, that is for any host OS and any guest OS. So it's an any in terms of what's running on what platform with VirtualBox. And the VM configuration, which is vulnerable, is the default if the network card is the Intel Pro 1000 MT desktop, which is a very popular network card and running in the default NAT mode. He says in his disclosure under how to protect yourself, he says, until the patched VirtualBox build is out, you can change the network card of your virtual machines to PCNet. He says either of 2 or to para-virtualized network. If you can't, he says, change the mode from NAT to another one. He says the former way is more secure. And then he's just sort of briefly, I'll quote him saying, introduction. He says, a default VirtualBox virtual network device is Intel Pro /1000 MT desktop, and the default network mode is NAT. He says the E1000 has a vulnerability allowing an attacker with root admin privileges in a guest, so you first have to be admin in the guest, to escape to the host's ring 3. So that is the application layer on the host. He says then the attacker can use existing techniques to escalate privileges to ring 0 via /dev/vbox drive. But again, so you have to have admin in the guest, then you get to non-admin in the host. So I don't know, reading behind, like what went on behind the scenes. Maybe this just didn't rise to the level that Oracle felt it was worth getting all worked up about. And so this guy said, fine, I'm just going to go public. He says, so anyway, it is a VM containment breach, which allows us to get out of the VM. That's not good, but it doesn't feel like it's the end of the world. There's a workaround, and I'm sure I mean, especially given this beautiful disclosure that he put together, that there's already a fix in the works. So anyway, another 0-day dropped. In this case, it's not nearly as much of a concern as something as we've seen from sandbox escapers, both of which were quickly leveraged. And Leo, you're going to love this one from our friends at CloudFlare. The site is, I love this, 1.1.1.1. And yes, you put http://1.1.1.1, which means they got the top level domain 1.
Oh, I like it. That's right. They could do other .1 stuff, couldn't they?
Yeah. So they have.
So it's not an IP address when you're entering that. That's the actual TLD.
Yes. Right. Right. Wait.
Wow. Or is it?
Wait. It's HTTPS.
Wait, let me ping it. Yeah, but that's, well, I don't know. That's an interesting question.
It's HTTPS. So they're not going to get a security certificate unless they've got a cert for that.
Huh.
So that's a really good question. I didn't even think to look at who issued the certificate for that when I brought it up. Let's see.
It is at 1.1.1.1, but that we knew that.
Let's see.
That's an interesting question. I guess I could do a who is. Right?
DigiCert gave them a certificate.
For the top level domain or for the IP address?
You can't get a certificate for an IP address. So the web's let's see, view save password, blah blah blah, view certificate. Okay, well, whoops.
No, they went through AP NIC, though. This is the Asia Pacific NIC.
Yeah. And it's the common name is star.cloudflare-dns.com.
Yeah.
So that's what they got their certificate for.
Right. So they don't own .1. Because everybody might. By the way, Cloudflare is going to do a domain registrar, right, for their customers.
Yes, in fact, we covered that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
They have opened it up to all of their customers, not just their enterprise customers. Right. Okay, so here's the cool thing: you go to with iOS or Android, https://1.1.1.1. And it is now offering you an app, either for iOS or Android. I tried it. And you download the app. It asks, I use the iOS. You download it. It asks you. It explains it's going to create a VPN profile. There's not a VPN connection, a VPN profile.
Oh, clever.
Yes. That's the way it makes it easy for them to change your DNS settings.
And Apple approved this, obviously.
Yes. And it then establishes DNS over HTTPS, Leo. It's not just changing your DNS. It is encrypting and privatizing all of your iOS or your Android mobile devices DNS queries. And you have there's in the options screen, the default is DNS over HTTPS. You can, if you want, switch it to over TLS. Both are emerging standards now, and there's other options and features. And so it changes your device to 1.1.1.1 and 1.0.0.1, which is their backup DNS. And essentially, it establishes an HTTPS tunnel through which all DNS goes, and it logs it. You can look at the log. And what shocked me was the moment I set this up, I went to look at the log, and it was like there was already 50 DNS queries from all kinds of crap in my phone.
You might want to note that other VPN apps will not work when you're using their VPN profile.
Right.
So it will eliminate the use of VPN for you.
Right.
Yeah. But that's,
right. Anyway, I was
this
very
is great.
impressed. It's very cool. So takeaway is anyone who is self-conscious.
There's just a switch to turn it off if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So that's good. So if you wanted to use a VPN, you wouldn't need it anyway. You could do that, and then if you want it, you could turn it on.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And somewhere, see if you can find the log. I'm not sure where that log was. It's got a nice little icon that I liked, and
yeah. Here's the log. It's under the menu.
Good.
Already, I have quite a few things in here.
That's it's
how does that possible?
It's shocking how much DNS a device is making.
Most of it's to Apple or Apple-related sites like Akamai, but still, wow.
Yeah,
that's fascinating. Holy cow. Nice. This is great. So I was tempted to make this my pick of the week for iOS and Today and Mac Break, but I wanted to hear from you first. So thumbs up, right?
A thumbs up. Now, on their page, they say privacy first guaranteed. They say we will, just to remind our listeners about 1.1.1.1 through Cloudflare, which of course any of us could set our PCs to. We will never sell your data or use it to target ads, period. We will never log your IP address the way other companies identify you, they say. And we're not just saying that. We've retained KPMG to audit our systems annually to ensure that we're doing what we say. And frankly, they say, we don't want to know what you do on the internet. It's none of our business. And we've taken the technical steps to ensure we can't. Now, what I take a little issue with is they said faster than anything else, 28% faster, in fact. They said we've built 1.1.1.1 to be the internet's fastest DNS directory. Don't take our word for it. The independent DNS monitor, DNSPerf, ranks 1.1.1.1, the fastest DNS service in the world. Since nearly everything you do on the internet starts with a DNS request, and obviously many things you don't do starts with a DNS request, choosing the fastest DNS directory across all your devices will accelerate almost everything you do online. Now, the reason I take a little issue with that is that I happen to also be the author of the internet's sort of standard benchmark for DNS. And when this was announced, it may have been because it was immediately at announcement. There were many of our listeners who reported that they had faster DNS than 1.1.1.1.
Right.
But that was because I think it's because Cloudflare was still rolling out the endpoints. That is what determines the DNS speed once you've got a fast server is its proximity to you. So and that's what we were finding was that people were reporting that nice as this sounded to have all the privacy benefits and all, if there wasn't a node near them, then their traffic still had to go a long way in both directions, and that slowed it down.
It's also HTTPS. Would that be slower too?
Not once the connection is established. What this does is it brings up a static connection. So it does the TLS negotiation
only once at the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it maintains a persistent connection so that it's just quick little packets zipping back and forth in order to get the work done. So what I would suggest is that maybe it's time to revisit. If you put in DNS benchmark to Google, once again, GRC is the only thing that comes up because we pretty much own that side of the world. I solved that problem correctly once. And it's worth taking a look at again, because you may find, as our listeners may have at announcement time, that, we'd like to use it, but, my own ISP's DNS server that's like next door to me is still fastest. On the other hand, your ISP may very well be selling a lot of information about you because they'd like to make money. And there are companies that the folks like PI, Privacy International, are want or going after that would like to not have people able to do that. So anyway, Leo, yes, I think this is 100% win for iOS and Android mobile devices for anyone who's interested in the, first of all, speed. And I absolutely, we know the Cloudflare guys. There's no question that they are honoring their commitments about privacy. None whatsoever.
So I should point out, it doesn't do this on the iPhone, but on the iPad, it does show that it has a little VPN designation. This must be something new they're doing on the iPad. But you're not really on a VPN.
Right.
So
I see
that's
it too.
another
Yes,
thing to keep in mind.
I hadn't noticed it.
Yeah.
Actually, I like that as proactive acknowledgement.
Yes.
That I've got my DNS redirected.
Yeah, but don't.
Leo, go to GRC spoofability test. I was going to mention in the miscellany that it's back online, and it didn't occur to me that and I'll explain when I get there, but. It just put DNS spoofability into the Google.
Yeah, the Google always knows. Yeah.
DNS.
Okay, and so if I run this with this on, I've got Cloudflare on. So if I just should initiate standard DNS spoofability, searching for DNS name servers used by your systems. This takes a little time, of course, because it's got to do some round tripping here.
Oh, it's doing hundreds of queries. Yep, I'm doing it now too.
2 servers found, 456 queries received. I'm doing this on the iPad, which is an interesting.
As I am right now, I'm holding my iPad also. I had 2 servers found, 409 queries received. So what happens is if it finds no additional servers, then it'll do 3 more lines.
Okay.
Where because it's continuing to look for I found now I've got 4 servers found.
Is that good or bad?
46. Well, it's why I designed the test this way. It's
kind of thoroughly looking. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So on the 3rd line, it found 0 additional ones.
Right.
And so it'll do that 3 times to make sure that no more reluctant servers come in.
Right.
But then it's going to show us what it knows about the servers that we're using, and they will not be your ISPs. They should be. Yep, and 4th line through now.
So to
0
be clear,
additional.
Your traffic is not encrypted through a VPN when you're using this. What's encrypted through a VPN is merely that DNS query, and your traffic is traveling normally over the public internet. Just so people don't get confused when they see that VPN icon, you're still on the public internet. Oops.
Correct.
Server stopped responding. Safari did not like the delay. So I don't know.
Found 2 more servers on the 6th round of testing.
Yeah, you didn't time out. I did, unfortunately.
No, I did time out. Could not open the page because the server stopped responding. Interesting.
That's Apple's defaults. So we may not know.
Cool.
What would I expect to see?
We don't know until we find out.
Well, I'll try to run on the desktop here and see what happens.
And I noticed that our listeners are doing this because I see a large traffic spike. At GRC is sending lots of DNS queries out.
At first, they were just downloading your DNS benchmark, but now they're doing this too.
Now they're doing.
You really don't mind hitting those servers, do you?
No.
Yeah.
No. So anyway, I think this is all good. Privacy while you're on the road. It's so simple to set up that you can easily tell, your weekend, tech guy listeners how to do this. And it prevents anybody from, again, you're right. It's not preventing them from seeing where you go, but it's preventing them from seeing the domain names that you're looking up. And of course, that's a big privacy leakage. So it's worth patching it. And if they are right, it's faster. And of course, everybody wants their stuff to be faster.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm doing it on the desktop now. I'll do it on a Mac, and I'll try it with Chrome on Windows machine too. It'll only let me do this from one IP address once at a time. So I'll wait till it's done.
That's right. It does.
You're too smart. Damn, he's smart.
Well, in fact, you'll like the charts it comes up with because remember, I developed this after Dan Kamensky showed us that DNS servers were not randomizing their queries.
Right.
And it was the lack of random query data which allowed someone to guess what the query would be and thus spoof a reply in order to do DNS spoofing, and so thus DNS spoofability. So
episode 155 if you want to hear more.
Cool.
Yep.
So while we're doing that, I'll mention just that Microsoft, it was sort of an interesting bit of coincidence that Microsoft published a note about BitLocker's exposure of its keys in RAM. But I note the time, and now would be a good time for us to take a break, and then we will continue with that.
Good. Well, I'll continue to run the spoofability test while I tell you how to protect yourself and your network online. So many times we hear about breaches, and the companies involved say, we had no idea that bad guys were on our network. The poster boy, the poster child for all this is Sony Pictures Entertainment. We know that a spear phishing attack got hackers onto their network. I think it was in May. Hackers had the free rein to wander the network, look for valuable resources, figure out what passwords would be, continue to send spear phishing attacks to learn more. And then exfiltrated, I can't remember what it was, but it was gigabytes of data, all before Sony even knew about it. Sony didn't find out about it till it was all over, and the hackers told them. That is an embarrassing thing for you, and it shouldn't happen. That's why I insist you go to Thinkst and find out about the Canary. Go to canary.tools/twit. I'm going to do it right now and log into my Thinkst Canary. The Thinkst Canary is an appliance that is basically a honeypot on your network. Actually, it's a number of appliances. You put as many as you want up there, and you can make them be anything you want, as with any good honeypot. Now, if you're a sysadmin, you understand the notion of setting up a honeypot, something that's attractive. Actually, it's more than attractive, something that's vulnerable that hackers look at and go, ooh. I like to set up things like open Windows shares, or right now I'm using my Synology NAS. It looks like a Synology NAS on the network. You may also want to use Canary tokens, which you also get when you get the Canary, to put documents like payroll, social security numbers.xls on various points on the server. When the bad guys are on your network, they see these honeypots, they're inevitably attracted to them, and the minute they in any way touch them, whether it's try to open it, try to hack it, just try to log in, you will immediately get a quality alert. You don't get 100% of alerts from Canaries, just one high-quality alert when it matters. And it is huge because you put that honeypot on your network to draw them in, and you will know the minute bad guys are on your network, you will know. They don't know the difference between a Canary honeypot and the real deal. Sprinkle a few Canaries on your network, make one a router, make one a Windows file share, and wait. You could even make it a SCADA device if you want. You can have it be a Siemens centrifuge if you want. Attackers, APT, and malicious insiders advertise their presence just because they can't resist. They interact with your Canary, and you get a high-quality alert. This was created. Thinkst is a company that was created by people who do this kind of pen testing for companies. They've trained governments. They've trained military. They've trained corporations on how to not get penetrated. Here's Ryan Huber. He's in charge of security at Slack, another one of our sponsors. Complete list of enterprise security products, he tweets. And he says, Evergreen Edition. Number 1, Thinkst Canary. Number 2, DuoSec. Number 3, Yubico. That is all. It is really, a testament. There's a Thinkst Canary. Actually, there's a bunch of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Canaries in operation. They're tiny. They're little devices. You see, they're like consumer electronic devices. Here's the beauty. You could set them up in just a few minutes. You tell it what you want it to look like. You tell it what it is. And then, it's so easy to configure. It will look like a router, a switch, a NAS server, a Linux box, a Windows server. completely indistinguishable from the real thing from the attacker's point of view, and they do everything right. I mean, they put the logos up there, the MAC addresses match. Nobody can tell. Attackers cannot resist them. You can even put fake files on them and roll them in Active Directory. They look like valuable objects. And then, boom, they've trained everybody how to break into networks. Now they're going to show you how to know if you've been broken into. And very affordable. Instead of a big upfront cost, canaries are licensed annually. So if your bird breaks during the year, no problem. You just say, hey, thanks, send me another one. They'll replace them immediately. The pricing means you can easily try a few, scale up as you needed. Some small shops have a couple of canaries. We have one. Some large banks have hundreds of them. Here's a tweet from Haroon, who is, of course, runs Thinkst. Deloitte, compromised for months, didn't know. SEC, ditto. Equifax, ditto. Canary.tools. And by the way, you go to Canary.tools and get Canary tokens for free. I like the ones you get with your Thinkst Canary because they phone home on your network. So there's no evidence at all that they're anything but what they say they are. So they started around $7,500 a year for 5 canaries. You can get fewer if you want. They're literally deployed all over the world on 7 continents. Some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley run them and love them. As you can see here, some you will never know they run them because they want to keep it a secret. Go to Canary. In fact, we started talking about this when they first started doing the tokens years ago. Go to canary.tools/twit. You get more information. You can see them in action. You get, for $7,500, 5 canaries, your own hosted console, upgrades, support, and maintenance for a full year. But if you use the offer code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box, 10% off forever, for life. We know you're going to love your Thinkst Canary, but if for any reason you decide you don't want it, you can return your canaries within their 2-month money-back guarantee and get a full refund. So you got 60 days to try it. Canary, look at Mika Hoponen, one of the great security guys from F-Secure. Canary is great. Canary.tools/twit. Enter the code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box. These things, I think this is such a clever idea. Easiest way ever to make a honeypot. Canary.tools/twit. Haroon is awesome, too. We really like him. He's a great guy. All right, we go back to Steve Gibson. We don't know what kinds of canaries he has, and we never will.
I got it working on the spoofability test
look at that.
on the
That's
iPad.
Cool.
Yeah, that's the what I did was I remembered there's a custom test, and so you're able to customize the parameters. And I made it less patient so that Safari wouldn't time out. So I use
our anti-spoofing safety is excellent. That of course is because Russell really is a good job. Does a good job of protecting us. 4,264 queries, 14 IP addresses. What do you want to see? A very even distribution like that? Because and in fact, what the histograms down below are the number of times we saw each of the different bits of the 16-bit, and so they're all very low and very flat. You don't want to see any of those being high. Very good.
Very nice.
We are not vulnerable to the Kaminsky exploit. Happy to say. But now I'm not running 1.1.1.1, but this is an example of what it would look like. And you're getting from 1.1.1.1, you get the same kind of... I actually saw what looked like some poor query transaction IDs. That is, the right-hand chart showed some lines in it a couple times, but I just reran it. It was actually a different server that I got the first time. Okay.
So it's sort of interesting. Actually, I only found one server because I told it not to be very impatient so that it would finish. But if you want to try it on your iOS device, there's a link at the bottom of the first page that's custom DNS, the custom spoofability test. Right. And you change the last 3 numbers to 10, 0, and 1, and then it will succeed. Okay. It will succeed.
And this is OpenDNS, by the way. That's what we use. And that's pretty good. So OpenDNS would be another good choice for people if they don't get good results from quad ones.
Yeah. Well, and I think it was just I retested and everything came out absolutely great. So it might have just been a weird fluke the first time. So
I'm using quad ones now. I like it. I'm going to use it on all my mobile devices. That's great. That's cool.
Yep. So coincident with the interesting discovery that hard drives are not doing a good job protecting their own secrets. Microsoft released a sort of a security advisory that was warning something that we've talked about for years, actually, which is that it's an interesting fact that both the earlier 1394 so-called God, I want to say Lightning, but it's not. The FireWire, the 1394 FireWire interface, and then the later Thunderbolt, both allow the connected device to do essentially DMA, direct memory access. And this has been a security concern because it would mean, and we've talked about this again for like through the years, it would allow somebody to connect a FireWire or Thunderbolt device, which is intelligent. It's not just a dumb drive. It's or a camera or something. It's actually a smart controller, which then is able to go over this serial interface, the FireWire or Thunderbolt serial interface, and suck out the contents of the system's RAM. The reason that's an issue, when we'll be discussing this here in a minute, relative to drive encryption and decryption, is that most systems, well, in fact, BitLocker specifically, in order to do its job, it has to have its key in memory. That is, somewhere in the system memory is the key in use the whole time your computer is on in order to read and write to and from the drive. Now, that's not unique to BitLocker. I mean, this is why, for example, Heartbleed that we talked about a couple years ago, the Heartbleed attack was opportunistically grabbing RAM from a server, and there was some probability or some chance that the RAM it would grab was valuable, that it contained the server's key, which is what made it's such a problem and a great concern. So anyway, the point is that Microsoft says BitLocker protected computers, a BitLocker protected computer may be vulnerable to DMA, direct memory access attacks, when the computer is turned on or is in the standby power state. This includes when the desktop is locked. BitLocker with TPM-only authentication allows for which is sort of the default. So it's encrypted and it's not harassing you. Allows for a computer to enter the power on state without any pre-boot authentication. Therefore, an attacker may be able to perform DNA attacks. And so the idea would be you turn the computer on and there it is. And now if you have DMA access, it can get to your key. They say in these configurations, an attacker may be able to search for BitLocker encryption keys in system memory by spoofing the SBP2, that's the serial bus protocol, hardware ID, by using an attacking device that is plugged into a 1394 port. Alternatively, an active Thunderbolt port also provides access to system memory to perform an attack. Note that Thunderbolt 3 on the new USB Type-C connector includes new security features which can be configured to protect against this type of attack without disabling the port. And we've talked about that when we've brought this up before. Even the Mac and FireWire had some provisions for limiting the range of memory that was available to DMA, though in many cases that wasn't the setup by default. So then they say this article applies to any of the following systems: systems that are left turned on, systems that are left in the standby power state, and systems that use TPM only BitLocker protection. And they go on to talk about how you can reconfigure what choices you make in order to to protect yourself against this. I've got a link in the show notes for anyone who's interested. But I thought I wanted to bring this up because the researchers who did not know about this, because their research predates the publication of this from Microsoft, bring up exactly this point when they are very soberly talking about what it is they found and how they feel about software versus hardware full drive encryption. So that wraps up our news for the week. I had under miscellany, interestingly enough, the first item under miscellany is GRC's DNS spoofability system is back online.
Nice timing.
Yeah. And what had happened was I didn't realize it had gone down, but I saw a couple mentions in Twitter, and I thought, okay, I got to look into that. And then I found a posting, someone had cross-posted from GRC's DNS news group into DNS Squirrel because they knew that's where I was spending all my time. And that really caught my attention. So finally I thought, okay, I got to see what's going on. And so I fired it up, and sure enough, it didn't work. And so it's like, oh, crap. So last weekend, I thought, well, maybe I just need to reboot the server. The GRC server had not been booted since last November because it never crashes and there are no memory leaks. And, if it's not broke, just leave it alone. So I thought, okay, well, be a good time to update it and maybe it just, something got a little cranky. I brought it back up. It didn't fix it. It turns out, and I don't really understand exactly what the sequence is, because I don't understand why the reports are it's been working until just a few months ago, but the problem was the compression, the HTTP compression, which I've always been a big fan of and has always been enabled. It stopped sending out incremental pieces of the page, and the spoofability page sends little dots out on the page to show you its progress as it's going. And the dots represent DNS. The dots come out when the user's browser asks for zero size GIF or GIF, depending upon what side of the fence you're on, images. And the GIF images come from a fake DNS server that's 13 characters of random.dns.grc.com. So what I built back then was a pseudo DNS server which grabs those queries from the user's browser that needs to look up. It needs to look up the IP address of this crazy DNS name, and when the request is made, I then return a CNAME, which is a canonical name of A.A.A.A.A.A.A, like as long as it can legally be. And then so that goes back to the user's DNS server that says, oh, you're kidding me. And so it says, okay, what's the name server for that? And so this is a means of forcing hundreds of queries in a short period of time from all the DNS name servers that the user has serving them, that is, the user's browser has serving them. Anyway, it broke because something about the compression in Windows stopped doing incremental releases. I don't know what it was, but as far as I know, it's nothing I did. Anyway, I made an exception to simply turn the compression off for the active code that my site uses. That's underneath the /x, and then it just came back to life again. So anyway, for anybody, I know that there are listeners of this podcast who have been discomfited by the fact that GRC's DNS spoofability system, which they use from time to time, had been offline for months. So I wanted to let everybody know it's back. And the timing is nice because people can play with it with their iOS devices. And if you want to play with it with your iOS device, and you find that Safari times out, I have a custom version, and you can set the last number. There's like 5 numbers which characterize the nature of the test. If you set the last one, it defaults to 4, which is how long it waits for more servers to show up. If you set it to 1, then it's less patient, and you'll get some results. So, and there's somewhere else where there's a 4 you can set to a 10. Anyway, so it's set 47, 48, 10 something, and then 1, and then it'll work for you. So, also for Simon Zarafa, our friend of the podcast, pointed me to something that I was just starting to play with, Leo, when you decided it was time to wrap up Mac Break Weekly today, which is really interesting to me. And so I wanted to any of our listeners who are webmasters, that is, who are in charge of their own web servers, Content Security Policy, CSP, is a neat facility which allows a website to tighten up its security by telling the browser what resources it's sourcing from where. And so what it does, the idea is that the website says, this is our content security policy. For example, scripts should only come from here, and images should only come from there, and so forth. But the problem is adding that afterwards, that is on a live site, is nerve-wracking because it's so easy. You know, the point is you want tight access control, but you don't want too tight access control, or you'll block some valid assets of your site. And so what this does is, if you really have your CSP policy locked down, and it's something you could easily do from the beginning, but it's hard to add afterwards. If it's locked down, it's very difficult for anything that somehow gets loose on one of your pages to get up to mischief, because it's like it just can't. It has no freedom and flexibility, or vastly less. So the point of this is, there is a widget which Simon pointed me to. It's called, for some reason, it's called Laboratory, although it's Laboratory by Mozilla. So maybe it's Mozilla's. I haven't had a chance to look at it closely, but it's a widget for Firefox.
This write-up is from Mozilla.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So what it does is, you go to your site, you activate this thing, and then you browse around your site. You visit pages, you do stuff, and it's learning where your different types of assets come from, and it builds for you the content security policy for your site based on its real-time interactive behavior while it's not being attacked. So the result will be a CSP, like a long, crazy-looking header string, which you could then add to your web server without breaking anything, so long as you didn't do anything that you hadn't done while you were like roaming around your site. Anyway, I'm going to play with it. I'll know more about it in the future. I would love to have, for GRC, a tighter content security policy, because why not? But I'm just afraid to mess with it because, my site's old and stuff's coming from all over the place. This would help anybody who wants to add this to an existing site to do so. And the last piece of Miscellany, Leo, is Peter Hamilton's Salvation.
Have you finished it now?
Finished it. And I would characterize it, I gave it a 5 stars. I understand the negative comments in the reviews. There are some people who only gave it 2 because they just want to drop right in to, start blowing stuff up. And this doesn't do that. I would argue this entire first book is setting the stage for the future. And I don't know if it's a trilogy or if it's more, but maybe 3/4 of the way through, I was sort of thinking like, okay, I'm not going to be impatient. I'm just going to know this is Peter, and he's going to take me for a long journey. And the only problem is now I have to probably wait a year. And this is what happened with Pandora's Star. Remember, is we got this fabulous first book, and then it was like, okay, wait for the second one. It's like, oh. And it was a year later. I had to reread Pandora's Star in order to remember what had gone on so that we could get to Judas Unchained. So anyway, for what it's worth, it really is good. It is. And it. One of the things that Peter sometimes does, he did this at the end of Fallen Dragon, is the whole book was a buildup to a surprise, which was kind of teased in different ways as you're going along. And it's like, okay, I don't know what that means, but I'll find out. Okay, I don't know what that means, but I'll find out. All was answered by the end. So there's nothing at all cliffhanging, except that now I want to know what's going to happen next. So I got to wait a long time. The good news is the 10th book in Rick Brown's second of 5 series of 15 books each. So, yes, that's 75 books.
Oh, my God.
It came out. It was released on October 28th. So now that's what I'm reading. So I've got plenty to keep me busy until Peter Hamilton figures.
I almost don't want to get involved in anything that long, because then I won't read anything else for years.
His stuff is so good, though, Leo. I mean, we have always enjoyed it. I could certainly understand somebody deciding to wait until the whole series is done.
The Hamilton stuff, yeah.
Before starting.
I think that's my choice.
Oh, you mean?
But you're not going to wait for Rick to finish 85 books, are you?
He does spit these things out. I don't know how he does it. They're not full of typos. They are really well written, and they are, for anybody who gave Salvation 2 stars. You got now 25 books in the Rick Brown series. The 15 books of the first set, and then the 10 books of the second. So there's 25. That ought to hold you for a while. And they are rock'em sock'em, they're like right down having, space opera, classic space opera.
Nice.
Salvation, though, I'm definitely glad I put the time in for this first one, because he's created another amazing future. Yeah. So I want to know
Jammer
about
B loved it too. He was said,
good.
I can't wait till Steve finishes so I can talk to him about it.
Cool. Well, speaking of finishing, Nicholas Kaprinsky sent me a tweet that is, again, apropos of today's topic. He says, I have a drive that is encrypted with Windows BitLocker. Well, or maybe not. But he says, but is not able to boot up. Can I still run Spinrite against it to decrypt and recover the drive's data? And as we know, the answer is yes. Spinrite doesn't care what data you have on the drive. It just cares whether the drive is happy with its ability to read it. And if the drive is not happy, even when it seems happy, but we ask it a little more, are you really, really sure? You really sure you're happy with this? And if it seems a little questionable, then we fix it. And if the drive says, no, I'm not happy, we say, come on, try again. No, I'm not, really not. No. Just give it, look again. And we do lots of things to get the drive to finally say, okay, fine, one last time you can have the data back. And that's all we need, one last time, because then the drive fixes it. It relocates the sector, brings in a spare. We write the good data back, and the drive boots again. So, Nicholas, yes, Spinrite is the only thing that I know of which is able to fix a BitLockered drive, which will not boot. So, good luck. I got 4 little bits of closing the loop data. Davy Jones, tweeting from 9ARSTH, said, Need a quick yes/no answer. Applied the sandbox to my Win 10 home box. Tested, it works. Then applied to W7 Pro. Command line said it was successful, but when tested, no child process under MSPENG. So not possible? And so decoding that, I realize he's talking about what we talked about last week, which was the sandboxing of Windows Defender. And I probably wasn't clear, or maybe I didn't say it at all, that it's only Windows 10. This is not something Windows 7, any version of Windows 7, and in Davy Jones's case, Windows 7 Pro. This is, more and more we're going to, unfortunately, see Microsoft offering things that we Windows 7 users wish we could have, but we got to go to Windows 10 in order to get them. And yeah, okay. No, thank you. But anyway, so the point is that command line was a registry entry, which only Windows 10 knows about. You can certainly put that in Windows 7, but it'll have no effect. So yes, it is the case that the Defender in the sandbox, which is absolutely what I think is like the ultimate solution now for integrated high-quality AV that doesn't bring with it a risk of creating a larger attack surface for viruses, it's Windows 10 only. David P. Valley tweeted, in the squirrel paradigm, what happens if there's a system-wide collapse? He says people would have hundreds of accounts with no record of their credentials because there was reason to record them. He must mean because there was no reason to record them when they were created. And David, you'll be glad to know that there's no such thing as a system-wide collapse because there's no system to collapse. So what is an arguably somewhat mixed blessing is that there is no one to go to if like you forget how to authenticate yourself to Squirrel, or if your Squirrel identity is lost. As a consequence, a huge amount of effort has been put into recovering from those events, but there isn't a system. There is no central headquarters. There's no main arbiter, and I would argue that's the whole point. This is a two-party solution between you and the websites you visit. So there is nothing to collapse. Skynet says, hi, Steve. With Windows Defender sandboxing, how do you turn it off if you need to? Do you retype the command with a 0 at the end instead of a 1 to disable it? And that was a great question I forgot to mention. Yes, that's exactly what you do. In the command line, which sets the registry key value to 1, you change it to 0, and then restart your system, and it will no longer be sandboxed. And finally, Edward Evans says, hi, Steve. Regarding Squirrel, how would I be able to have a bot associated with my user account without sharing my core secret? He says, for example, a web watcher that is watching on the far side of the auth wall. He says, love security now. Thanks to you, Leo, and the gang, I feel that I actually get security now. Thanks for all you do. And that's a really interesting question. I mean, that's definitely an edge case that I hadn't thought about. So he's saying, how would he be able to have a bot associated with his Squirrel identity without sharing his core secret? A web watcher that is watching on the far side of the auth wall. So, okay, so that first that would assume that he wants to delegate his identity to something which presumably has to log in order to do whatever it needs to do. So this is not something that the Squirrel client itself supports, but Squirrel creates a per site sort of, you can think of it like as a sub identity that is from your master identity, which is mixed with the domain name of the site you are wanting to authenticate to. A secondary identity is created, which is per site. It's unique for every site you visit. So it doesn't have to be a secret. So I mean, it's, for example, that's the identity, the public version of that is what you give to the site to declare who you are. The private component of that is how you sign a challenge from this site saying, prove to me that this is who you are. So it would be possible, and somebody could easily create it, I could or anybody could, sort of something that peels off just one site specific identity from your master Squirrel identity that would thus only work on that one site. And you could give that to a bot, which could then use that single, that identity only valid for that one site in order to operate on your behalf without worrying that it's able to do anything else. It would not have access to your larger Squirrel identity. So what's cool is that so far, all of these sorts of questions we've had answers for, which gives me hope for Squirrel. And after working on it for as long as I have, I do have hope for it. We'll see how it goes once we turn her loose.
All right. We're going to get to self-decrypting.
Self-decrypting
drive in just a second. But first, a word from our sponsor. Our show today brought to you by LastPass. Boy, if there's any group of people who probably don't need to be told about LastPass, it's you guys. I doubt anyone listening to this show uses the same password on multiple sites, or uses a password based on your kid's birthday and your dog's name, or posts passwords on a Post-it note on the monitor so they don't forget. But I can tell you something. If you have a business, your employees do all of that stuff. Every one of them. And they share their password with other employees and friends. And security is important in your business. We were just talking about the Canary. Let me talk about LastPass Enterprise. We started using it when one of our engineers posted all his passwords on a public web page because he could never remember them. That kind of triggered something in me. I said, maybe we better have a better strategy here. And we started using LastPass Enterprise. I had been using LastPass for a decade. Steve started using it after we interviewed the creator of LastPass, Joe Segrist, and Joe showed you the code and everything. And you gave it thumbs up, and that just solidified my long-term use of LastPass. I use it for everything. We use it as our family, too, because the family LastPass lets you have a shared folder, and I just put any password that I need Lisa to have, our utility bill or whatever. She gets it, too. Just kind of by putting it in that folder. That's really handy. It also allows me to make my spouse an emergency access contact if something should happen to me. If I become disabled or unable to function, she can take over because she can get access to my LastPass vault. Now, that's a very special use case. The LastPass vault really is yours. It's decrypted only on the device. Never at LastPass headquarters. They never have access to any of your passwords. Everything's stored there. LastPass generates good, long, strong passwords. It discourages reuse of passwords. It even has a security check that'll tell you when you've done that and makes it easy to fix it. For enterprises, it's incredible. 100 policies mean you can say things like, set standards for master passwords. You can enable resets. You can require two-factor, which we do. You can restrict access when you have to, an employee leaves. You get security reports. You can create shared folders. We do that too. So the business people have access to certain passwords. The ops people have a different set of passwords, a different folder. I use LastPass for everything. You can organize, of course, all your passwords for websites, but also apps, database logins, SSH keys, software licenses, Even business information, our EIN, is stored in LastPass, for instance, as are all my family's social security numbers. My passport and driver's license stored in LastPass. It's a secure folder for everything I want eyes-only access to. No one else can see it. The LastPass Authenticator app is awesome. A verification button pops up on an employee's phone to guarantee they're the only ones with access to their accounts. And if credentials are compromised, the app makes sure outsiders, even if they got the password, won't have access to the app. That's important. If you use Active Directory in your business, that one password can unlock not only Active Directory, but LastPass too. That's nice. And if you use iOS, iOS 12 has LastPass password fill-in. Makes it so easy. It's why I put LastPass on, Android does this too, on first pretty much when I set up any new device, whether it's a phone, a tablet, a laptop, or a desktop. LastPass goes on there right away because that's what I use to get everything else set up. And by the way, I love it that LastPass works everywhere, not just Windows and Mac, iOS and Android, but even on Linux. And I use a lot of Linux. So that's really a big part of why I use LastPass. LastPass Premium for individuals, LastPass Families for your entire family, LastPass Teams for teams of 50 or fewer, and what we use, LastPass Enterprise. It is absolutely a must in today's security landscape. You've got to have a password vault. Use the best, LastPass. More than 16 million people trust LastPass, 43,000 businesses. It's the #1 most preferred password manager. Look, all you got to do is go to lastpass.com/twit. And if you own a business, if you've got employees, if you've got other people using your passwords, you need to do this right now. lastpass.com/twit. Steve, I just thought before we get back to the show, kind of a tragic note. I know you've been around long enough to know the name Bill Godbout.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
S100 computers, the Godbout Electronics, and CompuPro. He passed away in the Camp Wildfire at the age of 79. He was one of the, now we're learning, dozens of victims of these.
He was a real engineer.
Amazing guy, 79 years old, Bill Godbout. He was an advocate for S100 computers, an industry standard in the CPM days. He was a parts supplier for electronic music projects. A big part of the computer revolution. In fact, in Hackers, Stephen Levy's book, he writes about Bill Godbout. He said he bought junk on a more massive scale. Usually government surplus chips and parts were rejected as not meeting the exacting standards required for a specific function, but perfectly acceptable for other uses. Godbout, a gruff, beefy, still active pilot who hinted at a past loaded with international espionage and intrigues for government agencies whose names he could not legally utter, would take the parts, throw his own brand name on them, and sell them, often in logic circuitry kits you could buy by mail order. That was the Wild West days of computing. A legend. And a very sad end to one of the greats in the business. So I thought I'd pass that along because I'm sure I knew you would know the name, even if many others in our audience don't.
Okay, so the title of the 16-page, very well written and wonderfully detailed research paper from two security researchers at the Radboud University in the Netherlands is titled Self-Encrypting Deception, Weaknesses in the Encryption of Solid-State Drives. And I will remind everyone that essentially they could also have said weaknesses in 100% of the drives we have looked at, which is to say, you know, they looked at 3 drives from Crucial, 2 internal and 2 external drives from Samsung. I'm sorry, 2 internal and 2 external drives from Samsung. Collectively, they make up about half of the market. So they are popular drives. And they found the security wanting, to put it mildly. So there are 2 standards in the industry. There's the so-called ATA security standard and what's known as the OPAL, OPAL standard. OPAL was produced by the by the Trusted Computing Group. ATA security was the original. And that's what drives have had for years, which essentially locks and unlocks an ATA drive as a whole based on a user-supplied password. And for example, any of us that have been using computers for a long time, oftentimes our BIOS will allow us to supply a drive password. And so the idea is that at boot time, the BIOS supplies the password, which then unlocks the drive so that there even is a boot sector available to boot from. So the protection is that if the drive is removed from the device, it doesn't have this password that you have assigned in the BIOS. And oftentimes you have to authenticate, the user has to authenticate to the BIOS in order for the BIOS to then unlock the drive. So, there's boot time protection. The successor to that original, the so-called ATA security feature set, the ATA spec groups things in feature sets. So like there's the smart feature set, the security feature set, and so forth. That was created by this Trusted Computing Group, and they're the same people who did like the TPM, right? The Trusted Platform Module. That they are a committee that generates these standards. Opal defines a much more complex and, unfortunately, much more difficult to implement encryption facility. And so, for example, if the much simpler and more straightforward ATA system could be said to be a one-to-one scheme where one password is used to unlock one region, which is to say the entire drive, then the Opal system would be described as a many-to-many system, where a drive's storage space can be freely subdivided into arbitrary bounded regions, each of which can be individually encrypted so that they are accessible under multiple and individually differing passwords, so that different passwords can selectively decrypt various subsets of the entire drive. I'm not kidding. I mean, that's this disaster that we have. And it's a disaster because nobody uses it. Yet the drives, in order to be compliant and to have the check marks on the marketing brochure, have to support it. And if they're going to support Opal, if they're going to say that they support the TCG, the Trusted Computing Group's Opal standard, then they have to do that, despite the fact that operating systems don't care about that. They just want to unlock the whole drive. But wouldn't it be nice if it were actually done in a secure fashion? So in digging around a little bit, I ran across an article written 7 years ago in 2011 titled "The Pros and Cons of Opal Compliant Drives." And in that article, its well-meaning but naive author states, quote, "Hardware-based encryption is very secure, far more secure than any software-based offering. Software," he writes, "can be corrupted or negated, while hardware cannot. Software runs under an operating system that is vulnerable to viruses and other attacks. An operating system, by definition, provides open access to applications and thus exposes these access points to improper use. Hardware-based security can more effectively restrict access from the outside, especially to unauthorized use." And I wrote in here in the show notes, "This charming view of the world predated the Spectre and Meltdown hardware problems by 7 years, and it assumes that hardware is magically perfect because it is harder than software." It would be nice to live in that world. Of course, we no longer do. So, the number one lesson we learned from this terrific research, that is the research, this 16-page paper, is that the fact that a drive sports a given interface and supports a given security standard whose marketing brochures boast of its security and encryption is entirely decoupled from and means absolutely nothing about the actual delivered security in the face of a determined effort to obtain the drive's content. Is the encrypted drive unreadable to the casual passerby? Absolutely. Is it unreadable to someone who is highly motivated to gain access to the drive's contents? That's the interesting question this pair of researchers set out to determine. And the initial surprising successes they had kept them going. Now, just remember, years ago when we were talking about TrueCrypt and how there was a drive in Brazil that was encrypted with TrueCrypt, a pure software solution, which, because apparently a good password was used, no authorities there were ever able to gain access to it, despite the fact that they desperately wanted to. And so they shipped it up to the US FBI and said, hey, you geniuses, we need to know what's on this drive. And as far as we know, that was never possible. That was software encryption, and a perfect example of it. And now we know, and we will be hearing a term here in a minute, we know that TrueCrypt then became VeriCrypt, which is the currently maintained non-BitLocker alternative for, you can use it on Windows and on other platforms as well. Okay, so these two skilled researchers from the Netherlands invested significant time and attention to reverse engineer 7 mainstream, highly popular SSDs, which account for, as I mentioned, collectively nearly half the market. The abstract of their research reads, we have analyzed the hardware disk encryption of several SSDs by reverse engineering their firmware. In theory, the security guarantees offered by hardware encryption are similar to or better than software implementations. In reality, we found that many hardware implementations have critical security weaknesses for many models, allowing for complete recovery of the data without knowledge of any secret. BitLocker, the encryption software built into Microsoft Windows, will rely exclusively on hardware full disk encryption if the SSD advertises support for it. Thus, for these drives, data protected by BitLocker is also compromised. That is, for these systems. They said this challenges the view that hardware encryption is preferable over software encryption. We conclude that one should not rely solely on hardware encryption offered by SSDs. We have analyzed firmwares from different SSD models offering hardware encryption, focusing on these flaws. The analysis uncovers a pattern of critical issues across vendors. For multiple models, it is possible to bypass the encryption entirely, allowing for a complete recovery of the data without any knowledge of passwords or keys. The situation is worsened by the delegation of encryption to the drive by BitLocker. Due to the default policy, many BitLocker users are unintentionally using hardware encryption exposing them to the same threats. As such, we should consider whether hardware encryption is a true successor to its software counterpart, and whether the established standards actually promote sound implementations. Okay, so what happened? Regular listeners to our podcast will know the correct way to manage a drive's encryption, and many of us could clearly state it. So here it is, clearly stated. This is the way you do it. At the factory, the very first time the drive is powered up, a high-quality entropy source, whether built-in or external, is used to produce a large 128 or 256-bit high-entropy symmetric secret. That key, will forever be used to key an inline AES algorithm which encrypts and decrypts the drive contents on the fly. So each drive, first time it's turned on, gets either makes it internally if it has a good source of entropy, or gets it from the factory, because the factories are easy. It's easy to have a good source of entropy. Every drive, a drive per drive unique key, which it has and forever uses to key its own AES algorithm. What that means is that all the data physically stored on the drive is gibberish. It is indistinguishable from random noise and can only be de-gibberized if you have the secret key. If the drive is not password protected, it is still encrypted transparently under that unique per drive secret key. Since a hardware implementation of the AES Rindal cipher is inline and able to keep up with the performance of the storage medium and the drive's external interface, whichever of the two is slower, that is, so that the inline encryption doesn't slow anything down, there's no performance penalty. And note, another feature of this is all you have to do is change the key and you have securely, completely wiped the drive with cryptographic security, including all the sectors that were ever spared out and taken out of service. So that's the way drives should be designed. If the drive's user or operating system wishes to later protect the drive's contents, a user or OS supplied secret is run through a PBKDF, a password-based key derivation function, which is internal to the drive to produce a password-dependent key, which is subsequently used to encrypt the drive's original master encryption key. The drive's original factory set master key is physically overwritten with its password encrypted version so that the original master key no longer exists anywhere on the drive. Right? We all know that. This is not rocket science. This is just the way you solve this problem. And finally, to allow a candidate password to be verified by the drive before being applied, a different PBKDF hashing function should also be used to independently verify any would-be decryption password. In other words, you would, when the password is created, it would be run through a separate hash with different parameters, and the proper hashed value would be stored by the drive. That way the drive can verify in a safe fashion where the password given to it is correct, yet there's no way to go from the stored verifier to there's no way to go from that over to the key used to decrypt the encrypted master key. So, as we know, security is inherently a weakest link phenomenon. And if even one of those things that I just described is not done properly, the system's weakest link will be feasibly broken, and the system's security guarantees will fail. Disturbing as it is, among those 7 very popular mainstream SSD drives, failures in every one of those aspects was actually found. So before I go any further, I should note that when the researchers realized just how bad the situation was in this industry, they elected to handle its disclosure responsibly. So in their write-up, they explained in their responsible disclosure section, they said, after discovering these vulnerabilities, we followed a process of responsible disclosure. In this case, the National Cybersecurity Center, the NCSC of the Netherlands, was informed first, which assisted in the responsible disclosure process by setting up the contact with the manufacturers involved, in this case, Crucial and Samsung. We cooperated with both manufacturers to fix their products and agreed not to disclose the vulnerabilities for 6 months. Both vendors have confirmed all the reported issues. For models currently being supported, firmware updates are either released or currently in development. And I should say that is now the case, that there is now updated firmware for all of these. So in the properly designed system I outlined above, we would say that the key is bound to the password, meaning that the information provided by the password is absolutely required to synthesize the key. Unfortunately, in the majority of these implementations, what the researchers found was that the key was not bound to the password, but that it was protected from access by a password, which, as we know, is not the same thing at all, because it opens that drive to a full password bypass. This is what the researchers were often able to achieve and demonstrate. So in other words, the drive's master key existed hidden somewhere on the drive, in its firmware, on internal or external non-volatile memory, somewhere. And the externally supplied password was being used not to create the key, but to unlock access to it, which is like, just like, okay, how do you explain that in this day and age? It just must be that somebody who's doesn't understand security has been given the task of implementing security, which is never going to be a good idea. So what were the designers thinking? If they were, the only way to explain their thinking is that they must have believed that there would never be any way to reverse engineer their implementation. They had to assume that their code was, first of all, error-free, and that the only access anyone would ever have would be through the front door by powering up the drive and accessing its standard ATA command interface. And speaking for a moment about the issue of error-free code, in their description of the reverse engineering of the very popular Samsung 840 EVO drive, the researchers note of some of the drive's power-up logic. They wrote, quote, the key is computed. This is just one of many keys that they talk about, not any particular super secret one. The key is computed during the drive's boot up sequence. However, due to a bug in the firmware, retrieving slot 451 during early boot fails. Therefore, the value of P, a value being hashed, is in fact a 0 buffer. Consequently, the resulting key is constant for all devices. That's just an aside. The point being that some piece of logic that was also crucial to the drive's security is completely dysfunctional in the firmware and never has been protecting the drive, and no one apparently ever saw that before or noticed it. So not only is the fundamental design of the drives flawed, but the flawed design is buggy. So it's not working the way doesn't even do what its designers intended. Okay, but back to the topic of keeping secrets inside the drive. Our intrepid security researchers took advantage of two things these designers apparently failed to consider: firmware downloads and the microcontroller JTAG debugging interfaces. Okay, so first, on the issue of the firmware, most of these devices, in fact all of them, have readily downloadable firmware. In some cases, the firmware was not published, but it was downloadable nonetheless. In some cases, it's a bootable ISO image incorporating an OS kernel, such as a small Linux, and the firmware. This can be readily reverse engineered, even when the firmware image which is bound into the ISO image has been obfuscated. And this, of course, as we talk about, like decrypting the DVD on our living room DVD player, you got to be able to decrypt it in order to see the movie. So it's easy to get access to the decrypted content. So even if the firmware image has been hidden, there's no way for something to successfully prevent it from being obtained. In other cases, a dedicated firmware utility is provided, but it too can be readily reverse engineered to obtain and then reverse engineer the drive's controller code. And even if neither of those avenues was available, the interface to the drive could be intercepted and the update data captured. This was actually done in the case of updating the firmware of two of the USB-connected external drives. Wireshark now has a USB packet capture facility, and so that was used in order to gain access to the firmware. So, and all of the drives use the industry standard ATA upload firmware command, making it easy to capture the firmware passing by. So one way or another, once the drives, and I've got air quotes here, secret internal operation has been exposed, the location of its secrets can be found. This podcast has spent a great deal of time talking about the keeping of secrets. So we know that the greatest breakthrough which occurred in cryptographic thinking was the innovation of a keyed cipher. Before that innovation, cryptographers created clever, unkeyed ciphers. But if that cipher's operation ever became known, then every secret it had ever been used to protect would simultaneously be divulged. Cryptography's greatest innovation then was the concept of a keyed cipher, where its algorithm could be and absolutely should be freely published and studied, and where the secret that must be kept was not the algorithm, but only a tiny key. Essentially, the use of a key created a near infinity of individual specific ciphers from a single master general cipher. So the analogy here is to the erroneous thinking that apparently went into the design of these self-encrypting SSDs. Their designers must have believed that they could keep their internal algorithms secret, or perhaps that no one would ever bother looking, because such secrets, we know, are impossible to keep. And beyond their exposure of their own firmware was the presence of their microcontroller's serial JTAG interface. We've touched on this in years past. JTAG is an industry standard interface which uses only a few wires and thus only consumes a few of a processor's or microcontroller's pins. It is universally supported in some fashion by all microcontrollers. The JTAG interface allows the microcontroller to be placed under the control of an external debugger. And through the JTAG interface, it's possible to examine the processor registers and its memory. The JTAG interface can be used to write and execute code on the fly in RAM. It gives anyone who can connect total control over the microcontroller. And in the case, and in their paper, they show the PC board layouts of these SSD drives, and where they find like a layout of the standard JTAG connector pins. So it's trivial to hook up a debugger to the microcontrollers, which are standard ARM cores, so they're understandable. Once you have a JTAG interface, you suck the firmware right out of the chip and then run it through IDA in order to reverse to decompile it and reverse engineer it. So the JTAG interface can usually be disabled after initial testing and manufacturer. Many microcontrollers have a one-way fusible link, basically a fuse that is blown, which then forever disables the microcontroller's JTAG interface. And this is present and done exactly because it is such a powerful and official standards-based backdoor into the operation of every microcontroller. Yet only 2 out of the 7 SSDs the researchers examined had their JTAG interfaces disabled. The rest freely accepted JTAG connections. And there's even something called the JTagulator, which is a piece of freeware and an open source platform that that automates the process of figuring out which are the JTAG pins on a chip when you don't already know. So, I mean, this chip, the whole thing is just amazing that this is sitting there present in an SSD pretending to be doing encryption for us. In one typical example where the model of a device's firmware was not available for download, its ATA command table could be located through its still functional JTAG interface, which allowed the researchers to learn of an undocumented vendor-specific ATA instruction and the secret parameters it required to unlock that command, which then commanded the drive to export its own firmware through the ATA interface. And then, of course, the drive secrets were available. So anyway, I'm not going to delve in detail into the individual fundamental design mistakes which were discovered in each of the 7 drives which these guys dissected. I've got a link in the show notes for anyone who is interested in their very nicely assembled 16-page research disclosure. But they did have some interesting things to say about the question of hardware versus software solutions and some salient recommendations which were driven by their discoveries. So at one point in their paper, they write, an argument that is often put forward in favor of hardware encryption is that the secret key is not stored in RAM, that is, main memory, main host accessible RAM, and therefore is not vulnerable to the aforementioned attacks. In reality, this argument is invalid for several reasons. First, the software running on the host PC controlling the hardware encryption typically does keep a secret key in RAM, introducing the same vulnerability. The reason is to support suspend to RAM, a low power state wherein all peripheral devices are shut down. Since the SSD is completely powered down, it must be unlocked again once the system is resumed. And therefore, either the operating system must retain a copy of the drive's secret key at all times, or the user must enter it again. In virtually all implementations, including BitLocker, the former is chosen, meaning the user is not hassled to re-unlock their drive. It comes out of sleep, it wakes up, and everything works. Well, that means that the drive has been given the secret again in order to re-unlock it. So it's not any more secure. 2, the burden of keeping the secret is moved to the SSD, not eliminated. The SSD typically keeps the key in the main memory of its controller. SSDs, as we know, are not security-hardened devices by any standard, they write. In fact, many have a debugging interface exposed on their PCB. That's the JTAG I was mentioning, allowing one to attach a debugging device and extract the secret key from the drive. Furthermore, they write, several means of obtaining code execution on the drive exist. And finally, 3, a memory readout attack against software encryption requires physical access. Given this, the attacker also has the opportunity to carry out a hot plugging attack against hardware encryption. This has been demonstrated in practice and poses a realistic threat. So, in their discussion at the end of the paper, they wrap it up by saying, an overview of possible flaws in hardware-based full disk encryption was given. We have analyzed the hardware full disk encryption of several SSDs by reverse engineering their firmware with focus on these flaws. The analysis uncovers a pattern of critical issues across vendors. For multiple models, it is possible to bypass the encryption entirely, allowing for a complete recovery of the data without any knowledge of passwords or keys. The situation is worsened by the delegation of encryption to the drive if the drive supports Trusted Computing Group Opal, as done by BitLocker. In such cases, BitLocker disables the software encryption, relying fully on the hardware encryption. As what did I do? I lost my place. As this is the default policy, many BitLocker users are unintentionally using hardware encryption, exposing them to the same threats. Anyway, so this goes on. Basically, what we now know is for these drives which were examined, the people who implemented the system used the password to gain access to the drive's encryption key rather than using information from the password to uniquely synthesize the key. That is the only way to do this, to solve this problem securely. Again, this is not rocket science. This is just proper security design. Okay, so where does this leave us? I would feel better using one of these drives once its firmware has been audited and fixed than any other drive that has not yet been scrutinized like this. And all of the drives which were subjected to this scrutiny by these engineers have now been updated. So if you have a crucial MX100, MX200, or MX300, a Samsung 840 EVO or 850 EVO, or an external Samsung T3 or T5, significantly more secure firmware awaits you. Go update your drive. And I would think at that point, I mean, again, I don't know, we're living in a world where we have to take our manufacturer's word for security until some auditor is given a chance to look at it. In fact, what these guys wrote was hardware encryption currently comes with the drawback of having to rely on proprietary, non-public, hard-to-audit crypto schemes designed by their manufacturers. Correctly implementing disk encryption is hard, and the consequences of making mistakes are often catastrophic. For this reason, implementation should be audited and subject to as much public scrutiny as possible. Amen. Manufacturers that take security seriously should publish their crypto schemes and corresponding code so that security claims can be independently verified. Why not? They said a pattern of critical issues across vendors indicates that the issues are not incidental but structural, and that we should critically assess whether this process of standards engineering actually benefits security, and if not, how it could be improved. The complexity of TCG Opal contributes to the difficulty of implementing the cryptography in self-encrypting drives. From a security perspective, standards should favor simplicity over a high number of features. The requirements as specified by the Opal standard, having a many-to-many relation between passwords and keys and allowing for multiple independent ranges with adjustable bounds, makes it very hard to implement it correctly. Finally, TCG should publish a reference implementation of Opal to aid developers. This reference implementation should also be made available for public scrutiny. It should take into account that wear leveling is applied for non-volatile storage. Opal's compliance tests should cover the implementation of the cryptography, and these tests should be independently assessed. Part of what I skipped in the details was that in one case, a drive's secrets, about every 20 times the password was changed, wear leveling caused the previous instance to be left unencrypted, and a new sector was assigned for the new security. And it made it possible at the chip level to go read the unencrypted original key from the non-volatile memory. So in this instance, wear leveling was a confounder to the attempt to overwrite the unencrypted data with something that was then encrypted. And in this case, it was the master key upon which all the other security of the drive depended. So Microsoft has responded to this news. They have an advisory 180028 titled Guidance for Configuring BitLocker to Enforce Software Encryption. Anybody who is using Windows, I'm thinking it's only available in Windows 8 and later. So once again, we Windows 7 users don't have access to this. But it reads, Microsoft is aware of reports of vulnerabilities in the hardware encryption of certain self-encrypting drives. Customers concerned about this issue should consider using the software-only encryption provided by BitLocker Drive Encryption. On Windows computers with self-encrypting drives, BitLocker Drive Encryption manages encryption and will use hardware encryption by default. Administrators who want to force software encryption on computers, and end users, with self-encrypting drives can accomplish this by deploying a group policy to override the default behavior. Windows will consult group policy to enforce software encryption only at the time of enabling BitLocker. Okay, so there is a command we all have in our machines. I tried it on Windows 7 just for grins. It's manage-bde.exe. That is manage BitLocker Drive Encryption.exe. Manage-bde.exe. If you just type that by itself, you need to use an elevated command prompt. So, right-click on command prompt, then run as administrator, then type manage-bde, hit enter. That'll give you a whole list of switches which that command can accept. One of them is status. So manage-bde space -status, and that will show you all the drives in your system which are usable with BitLocker and their current status, whether or not they are being encrypted, whether or not BitLocker is enabled at all on each drive, and if so, whether it is encrypted with hardware or software. If it is encrypted under hardware, as we now know, that may not be very good encryption. So what you need to do, if you are interested, is first turn off BitLocker on any drive where you wish to switch it to software encryption. You have to turn it off first. Then you go into gpedit.msc, and I have a picture at the last page of this week's show notes showing, because I did this morning, opened up the local group policy editor. I had to do it on Windows 10 because it's not available. This particular option is not available under Windows 7. And so if you follow this under, it's a local computer policy, computer configuration, administrative templates, Windows components, BitLocker Drive Encryption, and under that is fixed data drives. It's also available for removable data drives. And under there is configure use of hardware-based encryption for fixed data drives. And you are there. You'll only find that if you have Windows 8 or later, and you can choose the setting there to turn off, that is disable, hardware-based encryption for fixed data drives. Then re-enable BitLocker, and that will turn on software-based BitLocker encryption for your system. So again, jumping through some hoops, and at this point, I was trying to decide whether it would be safe to say that this requires local physical access, but it's probably the case with the information that has been published that these drives could have their firmware exported only using the ATA interface, which is available from the host. So you do not need the JTAG interface. So I would argue that this, if somebody was determined, they could probably gain access to the drive's key, which, by the way, these guys properly note is available in RAM. Just because it's in hardware doesn't mean the software key is not also available in RAM. It actually is under BitLocker in Windows, even if you're using hardware encryption. And also, it's been noted that all the new processors, all of the recent Intel processors, have the AESNI extension, which is specific instructions to accelerate the use of the AES Rijndael cipher in software so that it is not producing any slowdown. And our longtime listeners will remember that I benchmarked TrueCrypt and VeraCrypt, and I skipped over where these guys mention VeraCrypt. They do that a number of times in their paper. They're big fans of it, and they like it because, as we know, it's open source and has been audited. And as far as we know, there are no known vulnerabilities in it, unlike this disaster where drives are saying, oh, yeah, don't worry, your data is safe and encrypted, when in fact it is anything but. So that's the story on self-decrypting drives. They are, unfortunately, they use the password to unhide the master key rather than we're depending upon the password to synthesize the master key. There's a big difference.
Yeah. What can we do about it? Use VeraCrypt.
Yeah. Well, as far as we know, BitLocker, if you have access to Windows and BitLocker and you'd rather not use a third party, you can disable its use of hardware encryption and then re-encrypt your drive under BitLocker, having changed that setting, as long as you have Windows 8. If you're using Windows 7, then your only recourse is to disable BitLocker and install VeraCrypt. It's good. And as we know, it does not measurably slow things down. I was unable to detect any benchmarked slowdown of the system under TrueCrypt and or VeraCrypt. So it's not there doesn't seem to be any penalty in performance these days.
Good. And you can disable BitLocker's use of hardware encryption with a command line, right? I mean, there's no easy
command
way to
line.
do it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
A quick Google will find that.
Yep.
And a quick
and
Google,
we have complete documentation in this week's show notes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you put up the show notes at grc.com along with the audio of the show and the transcript.
Yep.
So that's the definitive place to go. grc.com. While you're there, get Spinrite, the world's best hard drive recovery and maintenance utility. You should also check out all the other cool free stuff Steve offers at grc.com. That's his website. He's on the Twitter at SGGRC, at SGGRC. You can leave him messages there. He accepts direct messaging. We also have audio and video versions of the show at twit.tv/SN. You can watch us do it live every Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, 21:30 UTC. Tune in at twit.tv/live. Join the chat room at irc.twit.tv. Chat along with us as we do the show. The chat room always posts the show notes link there as well, so you can get that and read along too. But you can also get on-demand versions, as I said, from Steve's site, our site, or subscribe. Please subscribe. That way you'll have a collection. Start your collection now. Gotta catch them all. grc.com, twit.tv/SN. I think that's all I need to say, except thank you, Steve, and we'll see you next time on Security Now.
Yay. Thanks, my friend. See you next week.
Security.